they operate slightly differently, but maybe have some parallels as well. Since in Álvaro's novel, it's a sort of historical and real place, Tenochtitlan, but also quite imaginary and constructed in many ways. In Dorothy's novel, the city is a fictional one, but also has quite a lot of parallels to Hong Kong in the recent past. And in Devika's novel, it's I think it maps quite well onto contemporary Mumbai, the life of contemporary Mumbai. So I'm just curious how each of you went about the process of constructing these cities, and how much research did you do, or how did you map these physical landscapes onto your fictional books?
So my novel is largely set in Mumbai, but it's also a story about rising Hindu nationalism in India. And one of the things that made Mumbai maybe a counterintuitive choice is that it's part of a state called Maharashtra that's very far away from the Hindi-speaking heartland, which is in the north of India, that is presented as the kind of, that is presented as the heart of a project like Hindu nationalism. And it's also a city that has a lot of, it's the financial powerhouse of India, and things like global finance undermine national boundaries. And so it was very striking to me when Maharashtra and Mumbai, like it's a vast state, it's a wealthy city, started to turn saffron, as we say, in 2014, which is the year that Narendra Modi came to power. And so I found this interesting case study, and I think that was my reason for being drawn to it. Outside of that, of course, I've spent 12 years living in the city, so it was also a place that I was very intimate with. But that intimacy didn't allow me to write the entire book just out of my own personal experience or imagination, because it was a period of time when the social and cultural fabric of India, as we knew it, was transforming by the day. And there was very little material on this. You couldn't really trust the headlines. Social media was really polarized. The history books and archives hadn't been written, and those archives that were there were being actively destroyed. And so one way of coping with it for me was revisiting this place that I thought I knew well through a lens of research, even though that word seems a bit clinical for what I did. And I sort of revisited the city, talking to people across the political spectrum, right from young men in Hindu right-wing groups to young activists branded as anti-nationals, to understand what they felt about that political moment. And sort of that's how the novel was born.
So I like Devika's idea about intimacy with a city. I was writing about a city with which I have a very long story. I grew up in Mexico City, and more than anything, I've been missing for centuries now, for like 30 years. So I have this very loving relationship with Mexico City that if you live in Mexico City, you don't have. There's no one as Mexican as the Mexicans from the United States. And there is a common going there because Tenochtitlan was destroyed in 1521, and a new different city was constructed there, first in what is today the very downtown in Mexico City, in the little island where the Palace of Moctezuma and the temples were. And then slowly, until the 20th century, it was completely destroyed. Now, if you go to Mexico City, you don't see the lake. You have to take a 1-hour cab to be able to see like the floating city as it was in that century. And I did an enormous amount of research in order to be able to bring the city to live, because that was, after this I will be quiet, because that was what I wanted to do. The idea of the novel was to bring the city that no one has seen to bring it to life. So I did research for years and years and consulted maps and everything. And I have told this story before, but just after finishing the novel, I went to Mexico City to visit family, not to do anything related to the city. And someone had told me, you should call this archaeologist. He has the keys to Tenochtitlan. And Mexico City is now what was Tenochtitlan. So I'm like, the keys to Tenochtitlan? And she's like, yeah, he has the keys. So go call him. So I arrived to Mexico City, call him. He is the head archaeologist of Mexico City now. I didn't know him in that moment. So I called him, and he ignores me because it was about to be the 500 years of the fall of Tenochtitlan. I will finish really fast. So I called him, and we spend the whole vacation in Mexico City. We go to Oaxaca, we return, and he never returns my calls. And when we are about to leave Mexico City, that is 2 days before the 500 years of the fall of Tenochtitlan, that, in my humble opinion, is more important than the fall of Constantinople or Rome, because he's there where modernity really begins. Nevertheless, 1 day before or 2, he calls me back, and says, in a moment I had sent him the novel, and tell him, this is the novel, I just don't want to screw, if you want to just put an eye on it. So he returns by email and says, I'll see you in El Zócalo in central Mexico City tomorrow at 9. And I will show you Tenochtitlan. Okay. So I arrived to the metro, and there is this man there, and he's like, yeah, let's go. So we walked to a palace, one of those 18th century palaces, enormous palaces near Mexico City, where the university was. And we arrived to one door, run down door, and he makes, and he says, sorry for the French, shit, the keys. And he calls someone, and then a young archaeologist comes with a key, the key to Tenochtitlan. So he opens the door, and we go down. And we see the city as no one had seen it now. I think that now, if you go, you can see some of the places that I saw. But he took us to like walk through Tenochtitlan that is still under there. And at the end, we go to have dinner, to have a big meal to thank him. And he tells me, by the way, you have everything wrong. you have to rewrite this and that and that, and he was right. So I did. So
I did say it was an imaginary city.
Yes, you were absolutely well. At the end, I corrected a little bit, but.
Dorothy?
Yeah, so my novel Owlish was set in a place called Nevers, but of course the reference is, like you can see, is about Hong Kong. The story is about a professor and his affair with a musical box ballerina. And when I shaped the professor's character and his relationship with this ballerina, basically I think everything is related to the city. Like he's like a very suppressed character, and he has to do this affair not with a real woman, but a doll. It's related to the environment he grew up like in Hong Kong. But the story I've been written for a long time, and I can't find an ending to it. I did do some historical research on my book about like how this Hong Kong become like a city like this, but I think the thing that that helps me finish the novel was the movement, the political protests, like in 2019. Maybe you have heard of it. There's a lot of protests happening in Hong Kong. And what I feel is that I see the subconsciousness of a city comes to the surface. Like when you walk on the street, you see what people do, you see their faces, you see their passion. Suddenly you feel that these people are not the people like, usually, Hong Kong is a very cold city. I don't know how much it's like New York. People are not very polite. Like they just walk past you, don't say hello. But at that time during the protests, you feel that these people all transform to something else. There is a time that like 10 o'clock at night, people would just poke their head out of the window and shout to each other. It's like, so we are here. So there is a very strong feeling for me, and then I know where the character should go. And another thing related to the city is the spatial imagination. Hong Kong is basically a shopping mall. Like, if you go on the subway, you go out, you can't go on the street. You have to go through the mall before you go on the street. But what's amazing is that during the time of protest, people turned the shopping malls into protest sites. And there are a lot of creative use of the space of the city. And you feel the people at the first time they own the city. by the way how they use the spaces. And in the novel, there is a lot of scenes. It's like inspired by this creative use of space.
I'm also interested in how not only the physical terrain of these cities, but also the kind of linguistic terrain of them is constructed, since I feel like each of your books often center the collision of languages. I mean, in Mumbai, there's obviously English and Hindi, but also other Indian languages like Marathi. You know, in Alvaro's book, there's a physically present translator, actually two translators, translating from Spanish to Nahuatl to Maya and so on. And in Dorothy's book, there are parallels to English and Mandarin and Cantonese. So I'm curious how each of you thought about the collision of languages in your novels.
Someone else first this time.
Dorothy, maybe?
Okay. So Hong Kong, like my mother tongue is actually Chaozhou dialect, because Hong Kong is an immigrant city. Basically, everyone comes from different parts. Most of them are from mainland China, but we speak different dialects. So I grew up, my mother is speaking a dialect, but most people there, the daily life use Cantonese. But then you also have like the official language, because it's a British colony, the official language is English. And then our written language is not Cantonese, not English, like literature we write. It's something very close to Mandarin, but not Mandarin. So it sounded like Cantonese, but the grammar is close to Mandarin. So I think people often criticize Hong Kong people, saying that your Chinese is bad, your English is bad, like because you can only speak a language that is not official. But to me, it's something, a gift in some way, because you have distance with your own language. Like every day you're switching between languages. So I do feel that it's certain kind of freedom there. Like you don't see that the language is born there. It's natural. It's something constructed. I do play with a little bit of that in the story, because the novel is very much about like how to be free as a person. Yeah. So the language is like, my thinking about language is related to that.
Yeah. To follow you, I never know what to say. In fiction, like in psychoanalysis, change operates in language, no, and only in language. So I work with a like demented devotion on it, not as worried as by the 19th century problem of beauty or contemporary political problems, but in order to produce all I'm saying is very obvious, I think, but to produce the apparition of a reality in someone's conscience, it has always, I have this very childish relationship with literature that has not been destroyed by 1 trillion years teaching it, and I'm still like it I find it still wonderful that Don Quixote never existed. No? Romeo and Juliet, they never existed. No? Hamlet, there was something like Hamlet. No, nevertheless, they have this tremendously influential existence that happens only through language. No? There is this Jorge Luis Borges' beautiful story that I may have invented, but I think that is real. But I don't remember where he tells it, in which he tells that when he was a child and his father was reading the father of Borges as Borges, they were all condemned to be blind. So they were like big readers because they knew that they would not be able to read during that most of their adult life. So Borges says that he would see his father reading until very late in the night. And then when he dropped the book, he would take the book and shake it. So the next day his father would open it and find another fiction inside of it. No? The letters could get reorganized in a different story. It's just impressive for me, no? That we believe in, like in the Jesus thing, and it's only language, no? And in that sense, I try to operate in that level, And that's why I did that enormous effort in dropping a lot of words that, in Nahua that are not familiar, of course, for a reader in New York, in Brooklyn, but they are not familiar for a reader in Mexico anymore. No people, there are Nahua spaces still in Mexico City, but they are reduced and sadly is not taught, whatever is the past of that verb, in school is very difficult. That's a very difficult one. So I wanted to create this idea of antiquity through dropping words that need to be self-explained also, no? Which was really complicated in the novel, because you cannot do what Carl, is not bad to speak bad about your ancestors, but Carlos Fuentes would say, no, they were eating a bolillo. A bolillo is this kind of bread that only exists in Mexico City, with no explanation. You just put the word calpuli there, and you have to work around everything to make a reader in Denmark not that it will be translated to Danish, but maybe, be able to understand without finding a definition or not doing the cyborg thing of going to the telephone, no, that we do that. Sorry.
So there's just so many languages spoken in Mumbai. I mean, there's of course English, which is the language of the middle class, the elites. There's Marathi, which is the language spoken by the state. In India, many states map onto also a territory that speaks a certain language. And there's Hindi, which is the national language, but it's also a city of a lot of local and international migration. So you have all other kinds of languages coming through it. Even within a language, there are different registers. So even within English in Mumbai, you have Minglish, which is a Marathi-inflected English, and you have Hinglish, which is a Hindi-inflected English. And there is really no way to do justice to all of those languages in one novel. You're just, you can pick up certain inflections when they get political. So for example, there are characters in the novel who start out calling the city Bombay, which shows in some ways their own upbringing and elitism, but then they start moving towards calling the city Mumbai, which is, it's not just about picking up a working class name, it's also a name that has been appropriated by the right wing and is used to, to say that this is a city only for Marathi people. So, these kind of shifts I could bring into the text. But the question of realism, like to write a book that had all those languages would just be like, an exercise like Babel. And I sometimes get this question back home, because in India, the question of English is very linked to authenticity. And so people will say, oh, did you ever think about writing this book in Hindi? And I don't know how that would be any more authentic, because there's a language hierarchy where Marathi speakers in Maharashtra really resent the imposition of the Hindi language. And there are, speakers like my mom whose language Konkani is a dialect, and they weren't given a state on the basis of the fact it's not a language but a dialect, and they resent the imposition of Marathi. So there's always a hegemonic project in any language that's going to override the others in the novel. And so the question is just more, I think, how do you betray that through the work? How do you undermine that through the work? How do you make it evident that this isn't trying to speak for everyone? Then trying to either defend your choice of language or, as some writers did in the wake of independence, actually pick an Indian language on the premise it's somehow more authentic to a place, and especially one like Mumbai.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Interesting. And when Álvaro was talking about the story of Borges shaking the book so it would be different, it made me wonder how each of you encounter your works when they are translated into English. I know Devika, your book was written in English, but maybe one day there will be a Hindi translation that you can read. And I'm just curious how you encounter the text that is both your own and not your own.
Do we go back?
Okay, we can go back. Maybe.
I can start with this one.
I know you have a note in your book also, right? That is,
yes, I have a note that in Spanish is for the editor, for the legend. I have this copy editor that was a legend in Spanish. She was the copy editor of Bolaño, of Javier María. Nice. She retired, and I will not write anymore. I'm just terrified of working with a younger editor. But so in Spanish, that letter is that addresses. First, it addressed the Spanish readers, because everybody, there is this fear of editors that is, I don't think that is a reader's fear. That is, people will not understand. They will see the word Tenochtitlan and they will freak out. Now, which I don't know. I read 1 trillion Russian novels when I was young, and I never freak out. And I understood perfectly that the names changed depending that who was addressing whom. So of course there is the youth right fury that I don't have anymore. That was if the Russians don't have to give an explanation, why do I have to give an explanation? No, if I was born in Europe, there is no list of names in Thomas Mann's novels. Now, why, if I'm Mexican, I have to do that? I'm not posing as a victim of anything. I'm just saying something that was through my head in my eternal fights with the editors. Should we put a dictionary or not in your novels? No, because this is too Mexican. What it means to be too Mexican. I don't know what is the case in this like middle ground, but in Mexico it's only the lexical. What changes is only words, is not the deep structures of the language. So anyone can read it anyway. That's an incredibly long turnover. So that letter was first for the Spanish readers, and then my wife, who is Argentinian, was like, and what about the Argentinians, not the Spaniards on their... And she was right, you know, the Chileans, the Paraguayans. So we put the letter. And then in English, it became, because once something gets, I think so, it's like a principle, if something gets into a fiction book, it becomes fiction, no matter what. No? So it was a letter for Natasha Wimmer, with whom I have the privilege of working. No? I've seen Natasha work with my originals, and it's so impressive how she sculpts in English the same book that I wrote in Spanish. No? And I see this whole process because we both live here, we both are fluent in Spanish and English, so we can kind of work together, and it's always very impressive to see that when we are doing the copy editing in English, at the end I never know, or I am not sure if the editor is speaking about the version in Spanish or in English. No? That's how deep my trust in Natasha's language is. No, she really is my voice in English. Said so. Not long ago in LA, we did a reading together, or in Marfa, I don't remember. And I would read in Spanish, and she would read in English. And it was like, wait. What is this? And we discovered that I have like a more, I don't know the word in English, like a more vulgar. Yeah. No, that doesn't sound elegant. My Spanish is here. my Spanish is rougher than her English. No? It has a more popular extraction. So we had this public conversation because we discovered it with an audience. No? And she was speaking about when you're translating, you need to find an English that will work in different levels. Yeah. Because I cannot pose as a Mexican. No? You are writing in this Mexican Spanish, but I need to write in a more universal English, no? Which was like a revelation for me, because at the same time, they are the same books, no? Exactly the same books, sorry. Or,
I mean, I guess, Dorothy, what is the experience of reading your book in English like for you?
Yeah, so I'm very close to my translator, Natascha Bruce. She's a UK translator, and she actually started translating my novel when I haven't even finished it. We went to a couple of residencies together, so she's part of my work, and I trust her so much. But there are certain things that when you translate from Chinese to English, you will have to lose. It's that, number one is ambiguity, because Chinese have like no singular plural and like sometimes gender, and so there is one thing like you have to make things fixed. Maybe when I write something, I haven't think, oh, is it one person or a lot of them? Then you have to fix while it's translated. Another thing is difficult to translate is that because Hong Kong is a colonial city, many places their name are translated. So it's the sound translation of English. And it's kind of like, you get that feeling like it's a translated work, But when you translate it back to English, you lose that. So there's something difficult. But I feel that the most difficult thing is actually the culture. Like there is certain symbol you see in like the Chinese context or people from Hong Kong, you will immediately know what it is. But when you translate to English, people might not know. Like sometimes might require footnote. People always ask this question, oh, do you need footnote when you translate a book into English? So I think that part is in fact the most difficult thing. I don't know how you feel, like, because there are certain things you don't even need to say so explicit if you publish it in your own country. But then when you publish in another country, you kind of have to add a little bit here and there so that people know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Do you feel like you're ever self-translating before you write in English, or is it
You well, one answer is no. I think when I was writing the book, I was so committed to the idea of not writing it for any particular public or market. I was not thinking of the reader at all. I was just thinking of what is how far can I push my imagination with regard to this form and this subject. So that's what I was chasing. And I just had a feeling that, this should be a book that someone very local can read in translation, or then someone can read in New York or Delhi. And that, of course, was very naive, because then I had the hardest time finding a publisher. There were publishers in the West, even though it was in English, they said it's too Indian because I've got so granular with the kind of terminology and social groups that are described there. And then there were also publishers in India which have had a problem. So, for example, initially there was some sense that the book is modernist, so the form was unfamiliar, so it took some time to get an English language publisher. But now that I have, and it published in India last year, and it did well there, and now it's coming out globally as well. We have a German and an Italian translation coming out, which I'm excited about, and I know nothing about those languages, so I've left it entirely to the translators. But we still don't have translations coming out in Hindi and Marathi. And one of the reasons for that has been the political climate in the country. So Marathi translator came on board, and Marathi publisher came on board and really tried to get translators for the project, and they didn't want to touch it because it's too politically sensitive. And in India, if you're publishing in English, you are relatively safe. Someone like HarperCollins in Delhi can take the risk. Someone like Norton in New York can take the risk. But some tiny publisher in Pune is just much, much more vulnerable in picking up something like this. And so we've ironically not got any Indian language publishers on the book yet, which I'm really sad about. I assume at some point, if it is translated into Marathi, for example, one of the challenges we might face is, in order to write this book, there are characters who speak Marathi. I have, for example, in a room in which, say, a number of characters are having a debate, there's some who are fluent in English, and then there's this one Marathi character who's either speaking Marathi, which I have now rendered in English, or then he's speaking a very broken English, inflicted with Marathi. Now, the question is, what happens when that gets translated into Marathi? Because his Marathi is not broken, it's really fluent, and it would sound ridiculous if he was struggling with Marathi, or if these other characters whose Marathi should be a struggle are actually speaking very fluently, because in the English. So, these are the kind of challenges and complexities I'm much looking forward to working with a translator on, if I can find the way to one. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was the point that both of you all raised on this thing of a book being too Mexican or, too Indian. I mean, I'm very fortunate that finally we found, editors in the UK, US. My editor in the US, Gina, is sitting right here. And they were amazing about this. Books from India are notorious for getting simplified, even if they're written in English when they move west. And not just footnotes. Whole storylines are changed. Whole endings are rewritten. Titles are changed. Covers are changed. And that never happened when I was consuming books from the West growing up. I mean, I was in my teens when I read Dostoevsky and Joyce, and what does a little girl from India know about Ireland or Russia? But you just assume that there's something I'll understand and something that'll be lost in translation, and other things will be an opportunity to learn. There was just no expectation to understand another person or culture fully, but just to be able to meet them at some moment of recognition somewhere. And so I think it's problematic if that attention or intention moves only in one direction or the other. And I'm really glad that maybe there's a shift in that now, where you have editors like Gina in the US who, this book has no changes. It came out in India last year. It's the same text that's come out in America. It's the same title. It's the same cover. And I am just, proud of all the publishers I've worked with for giving me that support. Yeah.
Yeah, I've also noticed that sort of greater openness, and I'm very happy about it. And then, okay, I have another question, which is that I guess one other thing I've noticed that your novels have in common is that often the entryway into these cities or into these narratives is through that of someone who's a sort of outsider figure. So there's Amanda in your novel who is a white American who goes to India for like a charitable philanthropic trip, right? And in Alvaro's novel, there are the conquistadors, so both Hernan Cortez, but also a fictional person named Jasmine Caldera. And in Dorothy's novel, Professor Q is not from Hong Kong itself, right, but from somewhere that's just described as somewhere further south. So I'm curious, I guess, what these characters were able to do for you in terms of introducing or navigating your narratives and places. Whoever can start, I guess. If anyone.
Yeah, I can begin. Growing up in Hong Kong, I think a lot about the experience is different from living in other places. Because we grew up without thinking that we belong to any country. That's how I always feel. And people don't care about nation. You don't have to. We don't have a national album that we will sing. And so for me, it's just that I don't like the idea of nationalism. I think that's often doing more harm than help. So I do purposefully make a character. He's a refugee, and he feels that Hong Kong is not, or the place never is not really his home, and then how he have to navigate himself in a place that he feels that he's an outsider. And for me, in fact, everyone is actually like him. It's just that it makes obvious in the novel. And in a certain way, we're all outsiders to a place. And that's how I feel. Yeah.
Maybe Álvaro.
I think that I had a problem when I was writing the novel that was related to whatever I wanted to say in the novel that is not clear for me. But I'm a novelist, a linguistic construction, and that's it. But the problem is if you are writing about what is called Old Mexico, I don't know, whatever the proper term is today. I think that the archaeologists say first contact Mexico, the very early 16th century in Mexico, is that the outsider in history is the local. The voice that has been silenced by 500 years of Eurocentric history. And I'm not proposing a revolution. I'm just saying things as they are. It's about, for 500 years, the voice of the indigenous people was brutally silenced. And to a degree in which there was this idea until very recently that there were not indigenous testimonies of the fall of Tenochtitlan, and there are many. There are a lot. They are enough. They are just surfacing because they were ignored for centuries. So in the novel, the operation was exactly, the political operation of the novel was exactly the opposite, to give visibility to another language, to another way of seeing the world that has been silenced. So there is a key word there that I, of course, as all novelists, all I do is stealing things. And I stole it from Matthew. I will forget the name. When the name of the book is When Moctezuma Met Cortés. Someone remembers? Matthew, it's a British historian that teaches in Pennsylvania. And he discovered that the Mexica called the Spaniards Castiltecas, the people from Castilla. And I just love the idea of writing a book in which the conquistadores, the Spaniards, the empire, whatever you want to name it, they are really the Castiltecas. So the novel tries to produce that operation, otra vez, again, sorry, operating in the language level. No? If instead of the conquistadores or the Spaniards of the empire, they are the Castiltecas, you can see the world in a different world, not a more fair world. No, it's not that anything will change after you write a book. Nothing will change. The world is ruined and that's it. Nevertheless, you can have, for the hour and a half that takes to read a novel, a short novel like this one, like a tiny little different point of view. No? And that's it. I think that it's a very humble operation that at the same time ends up being bold because it defies 500 years of telling a story from a point of view that I think that is wrong. I will not go there. This is not a seminary class. But it was not, what happened is not what the testimonies of the Europeans say. No? Now we are pretty sure about that. So.
I think I really love Dorothea's point on the fact that we're all outsiders, even to the places that we might have grown up in. And I think there's a way in which, as a novelist, seeing your own world with different eyes, there's a part of your psychology that is the outsider in that moment. And I think that's why this outsider character keeps popping up. It takes the form of maybe a foreigner to the country or a migrant or a visitor. But I think therein lies its source. And so Amanda was, for me, she's an American who ends up learning about the caste dynamics in India. And so in some ways, she was a vehicle, to explore my own ignorance about some of that. And the ignorance of a lot of the Indian middle class. My mom read the book, and she said that, I didn't know these things about how, caste operates in the kind of spaces where Amanda is. And so that's one thing where she is, when you look at it that way, she's very much an individual in her own right, speaking for a kind of psychology that we all share and that is universal. But besides that, there's also the role that the outsider plays in a society, right? And the funny thing is, it's not just within the world of the book that Amanda gets these reactions from the Indian characters who are constantly trying to break away from her gaze. Like they kind of suffer this white gaze, and they want to, they want to show that they are authentic in a way that doesn't pander to America. Even though as recently as 20 years ago, like Indians who came to the West for 1 month would come home with an American accent, but we're all sort of embarrassed about that now and want to show that we've decolonized our minds. And so they're reacting to her. They want that gaze destroyed. And I think one of the other questions she brings up in the book is, there's a person on the other side of that gaze. Like, what happens when they are destroyed? Is that really, and I think even in India today, this idea of decolonization has really been co-opted by the right. And they use the term to say, we want to be more Indian, so we're going to do away with these British laws and bring about new laws that make the country more of a police state, and what can be more colonial than a police state, but it's all done in the name of decolonization. So I think in a book about nationalism, Amanda there were so many reasons for her to be there as an individual, as an outsider. And I also get this question back home where people are like, it's a book about India, like what's an American character doing in it? Which says a lot about our conception of India. But I think the other thing is no book is a book about all of India. This is also just a book about a place. It's a book about a city. And if you think of Mumbai as a city, it's full of people from other countries living in it. It has a lot of global financial aid running through it. It has a lot of American capital running through it. So when you think of it in that sense, I think Amanda has as much sort of right, as it were, to be there as any of the other characters. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I find sort of exciting, interesting about all of your books in a way, is that on one hand, there's this kind of radical reshifting of perspective that actually is like a recentering of perspective, where, the Spaniards are now the sort of the foreign outsider characters, or like are the ones that are othered, or, Amanda's the one that's sort of othered, and yet you're also able to inhabit their perspectives in a humane way, even when they're, whoever they are. And there's also in each of their novels, there is, I've noticed that there's also like, you will shift perspectives, and there will be one chapter from this character's perspective, another chapter from that character's perspective, a chapter from the doll's perspective, a chapter from whomever's. And I think even in both of your novels, you yourself become characters, right? And I'm curious how you decided to, not for Dorothy's, I think, but for the two of yours. I'm curious, I guess, how or when you decided to do that and what you were trying to accomplish. I guess maybe, yeah.
That was for me?
Yeah.
No. I just like the idea of explore our ignorance. I'm doing the Bob Dylan thing, skipping your question. No, but that's due to lack of attention. I didn't thought that. What was the question? Sorry.
I mean, you
but
sort of
exploring our ignorance. What an idea! The poor American writers are taught in their MFAs. That's the name of it. MFAs, that they have to write about what they know, which is like the saddest thing I can think. Write about what you know, write about your mother, write about your tummy, write about what you have for lunch. We are exploring our ignorance. I'm so excited about that definition. Sorry.
Oh, I was just asking. I mean, I feel like even in your novel, you enter as a character to a certain extent, right? Where, you know, it's mentioned that someone is reading this novel that you've written and where you are and so on and so forth. And
I'm so sorry. I had worked with like more autobiographical characters, and in this one is very, the incidence is very small. I have noticed that when architects are restoring a building, they left parts of it as they found them. You know, maybe in the bathroom, not in the dining room, but there are always a place where you can see how it was. You know? And I think that if you are writing fiction, is silly. There is this 19th century idea that is the. Now I will forget it. I already remember that is Matthew Restal, but I forgot. The suspension of disbelief, that's this 19th century British idea of the suspension of disbelief. When I'm reading a novel, I know that I'm reading a novel. I'm not suspending my disbelief. I'm just reading a novel. So this idea of that you should write a book in which people think that there was not a writer, I find it silly. You can break the walls. You can do whatever you want. It's your novel. If it sucks, it sucks. It's fine. It's your novel. So I always try to leave a register of how that novel was written and when and where. In the books in English, in Sudden Death, there is this episode about someone wandering in the New York Public Library because I was writing in there. In this one, there is someone writing in Shelter Island because in the shelter-in-place period, I was living in Shelter Island. So I wanted to leave a little register of it's fiction. And I was writing this in a little table. Of course, there is, if you need a literary, there's everything in literature already was done. So you can justify it however you want, like thinking in a author that is more famous and or recognized or a saint. In that case, for me, is always Jorge Luis Borges. And the idea comes from El Aleph. No? When the character of El Aleph that sees the Aleph, he sees Jorge Luis Borges writing the Aleph. So the idea was somehow justified. No? When Moctezuma, I think it's that thing, no? Moctezuma sees into the future, and what he sees is the author writing a novel about himself. No, so it's a literary thing, and again, but more than anything, this was done that way. No, it was written this way.
Was that the same reasoning for you, or?
No, it was quite different.
Yeah.
Quite a different reason.
Yeah.
So my novel is written from the point of view of a rotating cast of characters. You know, you start with one perspective, and you go to the next, and you go to the next. And that is it's a form that's almost become a cliche now. Like a lot of novels are written in that way. You know, all novels have always involved perspectives, but I think since the time of the modernists, this idea of sort of foregrounding it as a literary device, where you have different chapters titled by a character, becomes a way to talk about a subject. And I think it says something about our relationship to truth or plurality, that there's so many young people using that form today, especially in the global south. Like I think even more than in the West, you see it now, these polyphonous novels coming out of India, out of South Asia. And so it was just, when I started, it was a really instinctive choice for me. And I think I started with 3 characters. Usually that's the number. It's about 3 or 4. It's what you pick up in writing school. And then I think I was about 100 pages in when it just seemed, it's a novel about democracy, and it seemed really undemocratic that it was told from the point of view of these like 2 upper caste Hindu men and this one white woman. And so I started to open up the novel. I was also doing a lot of research by then, and it felt like there were all these other voices trying to get in. And so one of the things that happens in the novel structure is it starts to spin outward, and so it goes from 3 to I think 9 to almost 40 characters. And so that's the idea was to see how far one could go with that idea. And of course there are erasures, and of course there's still silences, and the novel explores those as well. And then there is the last chapter, which has been the bane of my editor, several reviewers, in which, after having told this whole novel from many different perspectives, all in the third person, that chapter announces the I, and it's this narrator character who's not exactly me, but very much like me. And there was a pushback that, the novel should end where the story ends, which is the previous chapter. But a novel is not just a story. A novel as a form is bigger than a story. I think that's one of my favorite things about it. And for me, having that chapter felt very important because I think we often suspend disbelief and read the omniscient voice as the novel of the nation, the voice of God. This is reality. And so it felt very important to me in a book on subjects, on themes like this, to locate the perspective from which it's written. No, this is not the novel of a nation. No, this is not the reality of India. This is just the point of view of one Indian woman from a certain position trying to stretch her imagination as far as it will go. And so if I've got that American character a little wrong, correct me. And the same for all the other characters in the book. And so it was a sort of, it came out of a sort of ethical place at the end that it felt important to have it there. And the last thing I would say is it's not like all those voices kind of collapse into the individual. You have Bakhtin's idea of the meanwhile, where you read the book in totality. You have the collective, and you also have the individual. And both of those have a certain value that I wanted to give credence to in the work. I didn't want to write one novel that's all about the world filtered through the consciousness of this one solitary walker in a city. And I also didn't want to write a novel that was just all polyphony with no sense of an anchor, even though those voices transcend that anchor in the work. So I think that was the other reason for wanting that there, for wanting both of those there, the crowd and the individual.
Thank you very much for coming.